in regards to building this future type of organization and building the future, essentially, which is going to create, and you're talking about this in your book, for the first time, maybe 150 years ago, 1800s, we didn't have to, we could have taken ourselves out of the production itself, and output will still be created. And then computers came along, and then algorithms, and now machine learning, and now robotics, and all these things. So it seems like the future, the way it goes, and you obviously know this better, it seems like we would be able to, in 50 years or in a time frame, we will be able to have a massive amount of output, productivity created without any sort of
human labor
mode. So what do you think about that? What do you think that's going to change in the way the world works?
Totally correct. Go back 1,000 years ago. We were all working in the fields 18 hours a day to put three meals on the table, right? If you broke a leg, your family kind of was an existential threat because you couldn't go out and hunt or farm or whatever. So this is we've shrunk now the amount of time needed to earn a livable wage. The Industrial Revolution abstracted it to another level. Now computers, as you said, to another level. And now, in France it's theoretically 35 hours a week, and that's all you're allowed to work, right, to earn a livable wage. So then we spend a lot more time on leisure environments, etc. And we can see civilization going from a scarcity to an abundance environment, right? And so the question then becomes, what does life look like in that? And so we've been starting to research that. Peter talks about being bold and having entrepreneurs navigate this transition. I talk about how do you organize around this. We're starting to now think about what does the world look like when you get to the other side of that curve, if you get to the other side of the curve, right?
Sure.
For example, we've got good evidence when you look back in history that when a society meets abundance, where the Romans conquering most of Europe and half the world, or the Mughals taking over India, it's pretty clear to see historically what happened. So what happens is you end up with society doing food, art, music, and sex, not in that order. So you end up with kind of a lot of artistic expression. People kind of float around doing whatever they want. And it's a lovely society until then it collapses because they're not navigating the scarcity well enough. But now, so in terms of our kind of context, I think where we get to is we're delivering more and more productivity with technology. It's very clear we'll end up with a universal basic income type of structure where your basic needs are met, and then you do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Right? And when we've studied this, we've seen 14 experiments around the world on this that have been profoundly successful.
With universal basic income?
With UBIs, yeah.
Yeah.
But the transition from a workforce, labor, union, taxation economy to that is such a huge leap. We have no confidence in our political structures from getting us from A to B. Right?
Yeah.
Here in Canada, they did this in Manitoba a couple of decades ago, and they said, just give everybody money. It was so successful, but they didn't instrument it, they didn't measure it. It was profoundly successful, and the next government came in and said, that can't be a good idea, and they shut it down. And then all the problems started again.
30 years ago.
Yeah, they've been running this for a while.
Wow.
So when we've been able to analyze it in detail and see the longitudinal studies, profoundly interesting things happen because you take everybody out of the bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right? And now they can focus on what gives them aspiration, etc. They don't have to worry about this. The huge difference between Canada and the US is in the US, if you have a medical issue, your family has to declare bankruptcy. Medical bankruptcy is the leading cause of bankruptcy thing. And so you're always on an edge. You're always on an edge. And then you give them guns. I mean, this is not a great outcome. So you cross the border into Canada and everybody's like way more stable, peaceful, calm. People are not freaked out, whatever. And you wonder, what's the difference? And it's not that hard to figure out.
So you said something, and I think in a talk you gave about, correct me if I'm wrong, masculine energy and feminine energy dealing with scarcity and abundance.
Yeah.
And you said whenever like men deal with scarcity, they deal well with it, but then when they get into abundance, they don't know how to handle it. And
yes.
That's when we need,
yes.
And that's what the transition we're making right now with gender equality, like a lot of things that are happening in terms of gender and
no, you've hit it exactly on the head. The talk was titled Occupy Male Street.
Yes.
And it was about 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And it talks about the fact that we're moving from a top-down hierarchical command and control scarcity mindset to a much more decentralized, participatory, nurturing kind of environment. So we run the world right now, we run it on a very top-down structure, right? Judeo-Christian religions and the corporation the military-industrial complex, usually a man at the top. Right? And then we're moving to more of a female archetype. And it's important to note that I mean the archetype, not the gender.
Yes.
Right? But now we have Burning Man, the maker movement, the open source movement, the gifting economy, the DIY movement. And you operate very differently in that world. And one of the insights I got from one of the, a lady called Nicole Dreisky, who has done something incredible around education. But she noted that when the male archetype is under stress, it goes to the fight or flight response. And we thought all human beings did. And then about a decade ago, they looked at those studies and said, you know, all the people in those studies were men. So we know that men go fight or flight, but do women do the same thing? So they put women under stress. And it turns out women don't go to fight or flight at all.
Interesting.
Women go to what's called tend and befriend. They huddle up and they nurture each other.
Nourishing energy.
Which is what's happening on, say, the Occupy Wall Street movement or so on. And what we're seeing in the world today is the female archetype is under extreme stress. Right? And the observation that you pointed out, which is a really subtle one but very important, is when the male archetype reaches abundance, they relate to it as power and they try to hoard it. Wall Street money, Middle East oil,
because they're used with scarcity.
They're used to fighting for scarcity and they want to own as much as possible.
Yeah.
When the female archetype meets abundance, they share it around. Right? So the first thing happens when you bring a big an elephant home from the village and you've hunted it, is all the women share it around amongst all the families. Right? And that's the natural female archetype. And the internet is like that. You naturally share things. Right? And that's the female archetype. And as we move to abundance, we need a female archetype running the world, not the male archetype.
Yeah.
And so this is the tension that we're seeing right now.
Just to clarify, not men and women, it's an archetype.
It's an archetype.
Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting point of view, because you'd see all these changes that are happening with like men and women, more women in positions of management and so on. And there's a lot of movements that are going on, which I think are very beneficial to the future.
And the very simple observation of what's happening is that as we enter a world of extreme transition and extreme uncertainty driven by technology, so many things changing around us, the human need and human nature is to want an authoritarian, somebody who sounds like they know what they're talking about.
So you can...
And so you end up with Brexit, where they go, yes, it should be that Britain leaves. We're totally confident in what happens. Or Trump, or Bolsonaro, or Mexico, what's happening there. And you end up with authoritarian figures. And you end up in a hell of a mess, and which is where we're kind of heading. So the two futures that we are heading towards right now is we either can guide civilization to a Star Trek world or a Mad Max world. Right? It's pretty clear we're heading down a Mad Max world right now. We have to figure out how to tilt that future and tilt the direction of this super tanker called civilization a little bit over so we get into a more stable environment.
Yeah, I was just laughing because when you were speaking, I remember you were saying in a video that because of all these exponential technologies, because of the fact that we're going to live longer and we're going to have much more, the period of life that we're going to be healthy is going to be longer. There's a lot of companies that don't have any products anymore, like religion and stuff like that, because if you live for 200 years, it's going to be tough to sell you on that thing. So
the joke is that most religions are selling heaven as a business model.
Which was 30 years. You were dying at 30 years, so it made sense.
If you died at 25 or 30, then you could sell that as a business model. But now if you're lasting 100, 150 years, it's harder to sell heaven.
Yeah.